All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ariel Rivers, NACD's Pacific Region Representative, and I will facilitate this 1-hour NACD Urban and Community Conservation webinar. Thank you for joining us to learn about different strategies for managing backyard and natural waterways in North Dakota and New York. We will record this webinar and post it on NACD's website, along with a PDF of the presentations for future access. Please feel free to share these presentations and the link later widely with anyone within your networks to get this information out on these great projects. I don't believe, unless I'm missing him, Ron Rohal, who is the chair of our Urban and Community Resource Policy Group. Normally he joins us to give a welcome on behalf of NACD and our committee that manages these webinars, but unfortunately Ron was not able to join us. So in his stead, I will say thank you for joining us today. If you ever have any questions about the work that NACD is doing on behalf of districts related to urban and community work, broadly, generally related to stormwater management, urban agriculture, urban conservation, etc., please feel free to let us know at any time. We're always open to hearing from all of you and sharing your stories out. I would also like to thank our sole sponsor of the webinars, which is the Scott's Miracle-Gro Foundation. They've been an incredible partner in providing this information out to all of you, so we continually like to thank them for their support. So with that said, I would like to introduce our two speakers today. We have Jeffrey Miller, who is the director of the Cass County Conservation District in North Dakota, and he will present on some of their work leading to xerophytic landscaping. He has a degree in natural resources management from North Dakota State University and has worked at the Cass County Soil Conservation District for over 6 years. He has a deep-seated love for grassroots conservation and enjoys seeing projects go from the planning stage to implementation. So we're thrilled to have a presentation from Jeff today, and following Jeff, we'll hear from Caitlin Stewart, manager of the Hamilton County Soil and Water Conservation District in New York. She will present on a stream rehabilitation project that they did there. She was born in New Hartford, New York, and has been awestruck by the Adirondacks her entire life, and she has spent family vacations at her grandparents' camps on Lake Pleasant and Sacandaga Lake. After receiving her bachelor's in environmental science and geography from SUNY Oneonta and an MS in geoscience from UMass Amherst, she began her career as a conservation educator at the Hamilton County SWCD in 2008. In 2019, she became the district manager. She lives with her husband, Matt, and their dog, Artemis, in Lake Pleasant. She stokes her life with outdoor adventures in the Adirondack wilds and beyond. So thank you both for your great presentations that we're going to hear today and for your work in conservation broadly. And with that, Jeff, I'll hand it over to you. And you all have to unmute yourself as well. Great, thanks.
Okay, there it is. Okay, does that look good to everyone? Good, okay. So we work, Cass County, North Dakota is in, we have Fargo, we're in the Red River Valley. About half of our county is in the Red River Valley. Red River Valley is kind of a misnomer because it's a very flat landscape. There really is no valley here. We have very, very heavy clay soils. After a wet, snowy winter or a rainy spring, we get extensive flooding. The Red River will leave its banks and move overland. And what happens is the clay soils prevent the water from infiltrating the ground very quickly. The reason for this is that we are in the bed of Glacial Lake Agassiz. You can see Glacial Lake Agassiz covered an enormous area of North America. We're kind of right here, so we're on the very bottom of it. But Glacial Lake Agassiz was existed for about 5,000 years. It had fine-grained sediment covered the lake bed. When Glacial Lake Agassiz disappeared, overflowed 10,000 years ago, the Red River Valley is what was left. So what happens is rain gardens need a mixture of sand, loamy, and organic matter in the soil. The water needs to percolate through the soil so it can enter the subsoil and move away. Unfortunately for us, we don't have sandy, loamy soil, it's clay. Here's a rain garden we tried at a local zoo a few years ago, and you can see on the right side, the water just sat there. It sat there for a long time. It sat there for so long that even these wetland appropriate plants drowned out. And we ended up with this kind of ugly failure of a rain garden. This on the right-hand side, this is my backyard and really wet years. The kids like it because they can kayak out there, but you can see that that water sits there for a long time. This is the river in my front yard. Again, when the water gets high, that water stays for a long time. It doesn't infiltrate into the soil very quickly. Now, we can do rain gardens in the Red River Valley, but they require a lot of work. We can install elevated beds with permeable soils. However, that requires a lot of work. It requires extensive building of beds, and it's kind of working against nature. And a lot of times what we found with our projects is when we work against nature, things just don't work very well. So rather than work against nature, we kind of come up with another option. So instead of having rain gardens, we have things that we call pocket prairies, which are just small native plantings that do help reduce runoff and provide pollinator habitat. So pocket prairie is kind of a fancy word for xeriscape. Xeriscaping is the accepted word, but we kind of wanted a fun little name for people to really get excited about. So when we look at the tallgrass prairie, the Red River Valley is part of the tallgrass prairie. Today, only 4% or less of the original tallgrass prairie remains in the United States. Most of the remnants are on publicly owned land. In North Dakota, the best remnants occur in the Cheyenne National Grasslands, down near McLeod, North Dakota, and there's a couple west Grand Forks. The tallgrass prairie has been extensively converted to farmland, cities, anything but the actual tallgrass prairie. So what we wanted to do is, again, instead of working against nature and introducing species that aren't native here, we wanted to work with tallgrass prairie species. So happily, there's a wide variety of grass species that do occur in the tallgrass prairie and grow very well here. Kind of the most iconic tallgrass prairie species is the big blue stem. I guess when I hear tallgrass prairie, that's immediately what I think of is the tall 6 foot plus turkey foot blue stem. But the other grasses are little blue stem, switchgrass, Indian grass, prairie dropseed, slender wheatgrass, Canada wild rye. The list goes on and on, but the tallgrass species grow very well here. They're very easy to work with. There's also a wide variety of forb species. Again, when we start talking forbs, I always think black-eyed Susan, blazing star, hyssop, swamp milkweed, goldenrod, and on and on. Again, they're a smaller percentage of the native prairie, but they kind of provide a lot of benefit with pollinators and even with beauty. A lot of times when we talk about urban conservation, even if people are very interested in it, they still want it to look nice. So those forb species really help that happen. So why do we want to have native species? Well, the biggest reason to have native species is they evolved here. Oftentimes we'll have people ask us about growing blueberries, for instance. To grow blueberries in the Red River Valley is impossible. There is absolutely no way that you can grow blueberries. Our soils are basic. It can't happen. So instead of trying to do things that are very, very difficult, we want to do things that are easy because winter is very long here. So over the winter, people have all these really fun plans and ideas for the summer, and then summer comes and we blink our eye and we're super busy and nothing happens. So we want to have native species that are very easy to manage, very easy to install. So these native species are going to cut down on watering bill. They're going to tolerate these heavy clays and the high pH soils. And then they're also going to provide habitat for pollinators. So pollinators, one of the forb species that we really, really like to include everywhere is called the swamp milkweed. The swamp milkweed is a native milkweed. Unlike the common milkweed, it doesn't spread it via tiller. So if you plant that swamp milkweed, it's going to stay there rather than extending out everywhere. Swamp milkweed is appealing to a large diversity of butterflies. It's very easy to grow. I always kind of call it the bulletproof plant. You can almost grow it on concrete and it's going to thrive. So we always want to have the swamp milkweed, and it's a very beautiful plant. It really does lend a attractiveness to a pocket prairie. So what we do with pocket prairies is if it's a small pocket prairie, let's say it's the part of a front lawn or a 10 by 10 square or something, we in the past had tried doing it by seed. Doing it by seed is very difficult. you struggle with weeds, you struggle with germination. It takes time, and that's fine out in the rural areas if it takes a couple of years. But when you're in an urban area, generally you start getting complaints, and when at least here, when municipalities or cities get complaints, they want to get rid of it. So what we do instead of getting those complaints is we utilize plugs. Plugs are nice because if anybody's ever planted any sort of annual flower or anything, it's easy. There's no special training required. A lot of times what we'll do is encourage using landscape fabric, the same landscape fabric that we use in our tree plantings, over the ground initially, and then cut holes in there to plant the plugs and then cover that with wood mulch. That reduces the need for weeding. It helps conserve moisture, and it kind of, again, is a little more attractive for an urban space. One big thing that we always have to remember when you're designing a pocket prairie is bloom period. You don't want to have the majority of your plants blooming only in the spring, and then the rest of the season there's very few blooms. So we try to do a bloom period with cool season grasses, warm season grasses, and then spring, summer, and fall blooming flowers. So in the springtime, you're going to get your prairie phlox, and then you're going to get your hyssop in the summer, and then by fall you're going to have goldenrod, asters. So that's not only going to provide beauty for the homeowner, but also provide pollinating habitat for insects for the entire growing season. So we've got some completed pocket prairies here. These first couple ones are more of a garden type manicured. You can see on the left side, that was when it was installed. And this was on the right side was that fall. So that quickly, that small garden turned from just planted to a thriving garden. This one here, this was at the end of a driveway. It was kind of shaded. The landowner was kind of tired of trying to grow annuals there and struggling with them. We designed her a pocket prairie, and you can see here how that thing flourished again within 1 year. That thing was a flourishing pocket prairie of various species of forbs and grasses. The one on the left here was this was in a backyard. The one on the right was at a high school. So the one at the high school was a good example of needing that pocket prairie to look good quickly. In the past, they had tried seed, and it would get overrun with thistle, spurge, and a bunch of other weeds. It would get mowed down or sprayed out when we try again. And we actually ended up succeeding there by both seeding and installing plugs, and then instructing the grounds crew on a very aggressive weed eradication program that required hand pulling the thistle to kind of get ahead of it. One on the left side here is at a daycare by the sign in the front. They had a very good take of tallgrass species, and then on the right here, this was at a park in Fargo. And again, in the past, they had always filled these areas with annual plants, and annual plants are expensive. They're not native. They require a lot of expense. We were able to kind of convince them to go native, reduce their expense, and have a perennial plot that they don't have to come back every spring and redo. And I'm sure North Dakota is like a lot of other places. We get some years when it's wet, when it's dry, when it's cold, when it's hot, and you never do know what that year is going to be like. So having a very adaptable native plant makes it so we're not fighting nature all the time. And I guess if we have any questions at the end, I'll be happy to answer. But I hope you enjoyed it, and yeah, thanks for listening to me.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Jeff. And I forgot to mention this at the start of the webinar, but we will do questions and answers after both presentations. I see Caitlin's already putting some in there. So please put your questions in the chat box, and we'll address them at the end of both presentations. And with that, Caitlin, I'll pass it over to you to get started.
Thank you so much. Ariel, is my screen coming through okay? Wonderful. It is such a pleasure to be here with all of you this afternoon. I am going to present Protecting Water Quality with Green Infrastructure Innovation. I want to start off by thanking Ariel for facilitating today's online webinar, and also the National Association of Conservation Districts for spearheading this webinar series. I want to also thank everyone who's on the call this afternoon. As Ariel mentioned, my name is Caitlin Stewart, and I am so glad that you are here today. I am the district manager for Hamilton County Soil and Water Conservation District in the beautiful Adirondack Mountains of upstate New York. A little bit about myself. I grew up in Utica and summered here in the Adirondacks, and am so grateful to have a career in conservation. The purpose of this afternoon's talk is to provide you with an overview of green infrastructure at the town of Inlet's Arrowhead Park, and to also show how this project protects water quality in the Black River watershed. So where on earth are we? Where is the town of Inlet? This map shows the state of New York, and the red dot is precisely where the town of Inlet's Arrowhead Park is. It's in the northern portion of Hamilton County. Thought it'd be nice for everyone to get a little bit of perspective about where this project site is. This stormwater control and green infrastructure project maintains water quality in Hamilton County by reducing stormwater runoff, preventing flooding, and decreasing pollution that flows into the Fourth and Fifth Lake channels. This was a wonderful educational opportunity. Arrowhead Park gets a ton of traffic year-round. Visitors from all over come to the town of Inlet for its beauty, to recreate, to reconnect, to unplug. And this was a wonderful site to demonstrate some green infrastructure in Hamilton County. We first consulted with our partners at the Warren County Soil and Water Conservation District. They are experts in green infrastructure. They have done a lot of projects in their county, and we consulted with them to select the best method for this precise project location. And we decided that TruGrid Pro Plus permeable pavers were the perfect type of green infrastructure to install here. I actually have a sample here that I hope you all can see. They look like giant cup holders, and they have a lot of pore space. They are 100% permeable, and they offer incredible water detention and stormwater management. The environmental issue that we were addressing at this project site included stormwater runoff. The entire area is blacktop. It's paved, it's pavement. And the town and the municipal center would experience puddling all over the pavement and the parking lot. And the water would flow directly in to the Fourth and Fifth Lake channel. And you can see part of the channel here in this picture. So by installing this green infrastructure, we are truly preventing stormwater pollution from happening. We're allowing water that normally flows over the surface of this pavement to infiltrate the ground, and the ground is doing an incredible job at soaking up these pollutions, these pollutants that normally would flow right into the Fourth and Fifth Lake channels. So as you know, as we mentioned, the stormwater runoff is carrying pollution, things like pet waste, road salt, automotive fluids, and this project is preventing it from polluting the Fourth and Fifth Lake channels. So here's the project site again. Fourth Lake is in the top right-hand corner of your screen. Arrowhead Park again is that red tag, and you can see how closely the channel flows right to Arrowhead Park, eventually emptying into Fifth Lake at the bottom left of your screen. So a nice aerial view of the project site and why it's contributing to water pollution, to aquatic pollution. Partners make it happen. We cannot do this type of work alone. As I mentioned, we consulted with Warren County Soil and Water, and they recommended these true grid pavers as the perfect method of green infrastructure at the project site. We also partnered with the Town of Inlet Highway Department, and they provided crew members and equipment to assist with project installation, as did the Parks and Rec Department. And we provided some funding, and we provided staff time to help with installation as well. Our funding sources. The Finger Lakes Lake Ontario Watershed Protection Alliance funded our staff salaries, so the time that we took to install the project, to research the project, and also to get the education out there. In New York State, we receive funding in the form of state aid, and each conservation district receives $6,000 for a special project. So we put that $6,000 directly into this green infrastructure stormwater pollution project. And the Town of Inlet Highway Department provided the remaining funds for the project materials that Finger Lakes and Part B was unable to cover. And their Department of Parks and Recs provided in-kind service in the form of staff to help with project installation, as well as equipment. Okay, so we've covered where precisely the project is, the problem that we're trying to solve, and why we selected these true grid pavers. Now, what exactly is involved with the green infrastructure installation? Step one is to survey the property and look for areas that would benefit from green infrastructure. Where is the water pooling? Where is it running off? Step two is to remove impervious surfaces, the parking lot, basically, by excavating the landscape to the desired depth. Step three is to lay down a geotextile fabric that acts as a barrier between that subsoil and the rocks. Step four is to place uniform stone that's 3/4 of an inch in diameter on top of that liner and tamp everything down. Step five, this is where those true grid pavers come in. The pavers are installed on top of the 3/4 inch diameter stone. And finally, the top layer is 1/2 inch diameter stone that's installed on top of the pavers and tamped down. So these photos at the bottom here show excavation of the site initially. And there you can see the geotextile fabric and the stone, and then those pervious pavers. And finally, the photo on the right, that's our district technician, Lenny Crute, tamping down that final layer of 1/2 inch diameter stone. So this green infrastructure innovation can be thought of like the most delicious sub you have ever delved into. We have layers of a delicious slice of bread, then you have your meats, your cheeses, your veggies, all slathered with maybe some honey mustard and mayo, and you're ready to bite in. So here we have our layers. This is the cross section of what we just reviewed. You first excavate your site, that's the brown, the soil. And then you lay down your geotextile fabric liner, top that off with your larger stone. Then you install your True Grid Pro Plus permeable pavers. And finally, you top that off with your 1/2-inch diameter stone and tamp everything down. So again, just this nice layered system to install your green infrastructure. A couple of field notes. Rocks of the same size were used to limit compaction and increase void space. More void space means more water that can be sucked up at this project site. So this is allowing for the maximum storm water and flood infiltration during a storm event. So the maximum amount of storm water and flood waters are able to be infiltrated because we have all of this void space. These True Grid pavers are between 40 and 60% void space. This fills with water during a storm event. And that geotextile fabric at the very bottom allows water to percolate successfully down into the soil. And the open pore spaces between the rock collect a huge volume of water without any issue. So basically, this type of green infrastructure is acting like a reservoir for stormwater that normally would be running off into 4th and 5th Lake. So how much does this cost? Here's a budget summary. Personnel services through FLOPA, that was about $1,200. Same for the gravel and stone. The Town of Inlet Highway Department covered $1,200 for the gravel and stone. That Part B component, we were able to kick in $6,000 for a grand total of $8,500. Tangible outcomes. That $8,500 covered about 1,200 square feet of True Grid pavers. And 100% of runoff from a 1/4 of an acre during a 1.5-inch storm event is able to be soaked up. So that is very effective. 7,100 gallons of water is infiltrated instead of running off. That is a huge number. So this green infrastructure is very effective and it's cost efficient as well. Some more tangible outcomes. The Town of Inlet has raved about this project. They have seen decreased flooding and they want to put these True Grid pavers everywhere. So this has been a wonderful project for them. They want to do more of this type of green infrastructure. And our second technician, Jamie Parslow, is working on some educational flyers, posters that will be installed at the site to educate the public about what exactly is going on with these True Grid pavers. She's done a beautiful job with the layout, and we'll be able to get those installed later this spring to educate the public about green infrastructure. And finally, the bottom line, this green infrastructure is maintaining the integrity of water quality in the surrounding watershed. So I think Ariel has been monitoring the chat box with some questions. Our mission at Hamilton County Soil and Water is to manage and promote the wise use of natural resources in Hamilton County. And I want to recognize our clerk, Marge, and our technicians, Jamie and Lenny, for the incredible work that they do. And this project would not have been possible without them. And there's my dog Artemis, just because he's so cute to end with. Folks, thank you.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Caitlin. Also a wonderful presentation and big impact with a relatively small budget. That's impressive. So good work on that. All right, so please, like I mentioned to everyone in the audience, please feel free to put your questions in the chat box and we'll go through them. I'll make sure to read them out loud so that we can capture them as well for the recording that will later be added to YouTube. So I want to start with a question to kind of address your questions that you had put in the chat box, Caitlin. You had asked Jeff about the purchase of milkweed plugs and if he recalls the price, but I want to couch that in sort of a context. I know a lot of districts right now have had trouble finding native plants thanks to supply chain issues or other limitations within their states. So I'm curious in general if both of you, if you have worked with native plants, if you wouldn't mind addressing that as well, Caitlin, and then the questions about the milkweed plugs and price, Jeff.
Yeah, so you made a good point. I know right now we're struggling, or we struggled with finding trees and shrubs. We're very fortunate that there is an organization called the United Prairie Foundation, UPF, and they're out of their headquarters is in a small town southwest of here. They actually have a native plant nursery that all they grow and in the greenhouse is native plants. So we're very fortunate that they're just a hop, skip, and jump away. They sell plants. You can buy 32 plants, a flat of 32 plugs for $110. Now, one thing I should have mentioned in my presentation is that we offer cost share to the citizens of Cass County. So we offer 75% cost share. So if they spend that $110, they're going to and they submit that receipt to me with the right plants and I check the project out, they're going to get a check for 75% of that cost to try to encourage people to do that. So when when you are looking for the plants, it's very important to get your local ecotype plants. In the past, we had bought through some mail order places in Minnesota. That's about as far as I would want to go. I wouldn't want to buy plants from Illinois just because even though they might be in the same zone and the same plant, they're not going to necessarily grow as well here. So that's really important to make sure that you're finding as close as you can local ecotypes. I mean, again, we're very fortunate having that very hyper local greenhouse here, but there is some mail order ones. Again, there is some supply chain disruptions of plants. And we're actually waiting to get our conifer trees from a nursery that has 2 feet of snow on the ground right now. So it's you do what you can, but yeah. So try to find as local as you can, I guess would be my recommendation.
Great, thank you. And Caitlin, within your green infrastructure project, had you incorporated native plants as well and run into any issues and been able to overcome those too?
No, no installation with the native plants. We have used native plants on a variety of other project sites. We used Streamco Willow on a bioengineering site on Marion Brook that we installed this summer, and those trees are growing rampant. They are super happy with the wet feet, and they are just loving life along this riverbank and stabilizing it. We also have a pollinator garden, a bioswale, and a rain garden here at the district. And with just a little bit of TLC, our native plants are very much flourishing.
Good. That's great to hear. All right, so I'm going to get into some specific questions for you, Caitlin. You might have seen these in the chat box as well. So the first one on the GI installation, are you finding over time that the paver cells plug up with using geotextile fabric underneath? And this is from an individual who had said that when they install the grid, they don't use the fabric, but they do have several inches or more of base drainage rock under the grid and haven't had any issues with plugging.
Helen, thank you so much for sharing. We installed our project in 2020, and I think it's a little bit too early to tell if the geotextile fabric is going to cause any issues with infiltration, but really great information to know. And I will certainly pass along that information to Jamie and Lenny as they install more of these types of projects. It's interesting to hear that you have had issues. I'm glad to hear that you've resolved that by not installing that fabric. So really, really good information there.
Yeah, and she was also curious as well if you can drive, how thick that particular grid is, and if you can drive on it. And separately, Amanda O'Keefe was also curious if you could use those pavers for parking areas, driveways.
Absolutely. I just got my measuring tape out, and our True Grid pavers here, let me pop them up again. So this is about 3 inches thick. So our pavers are 3 inches. And you can incorporate them into driveways, into walkways, things like that. So absolutely, they are meant to be built into driveways and walkways, things that can take some weight over them.
And so how long do you suspect, what's the lifespan of those particular pavers in this project in general?
Right. I actually just Googled this, and these True Grid pavers, the company says that they will last 25 to 60 years, depending on the application. So a 25 to 60 year life expectancy for the True Grid porous pavers.
All right. And one more specific question on this topic. Can you talk about why the compaction of the gravel layers was needed? Do you have to use mild compactive effort to assure you don't compact the soils below into which you want to encourage infiltration, of course?
Great. So compacting will, I'm not sure why why it was so important to compact all of the materials. But what I can do, I'm going to take a note and I will follow up with Lenny and Jamie, and I'll get back to you.
All right, great, thank you. So now I'd like to get back to a couple more sort of broad questions for both of you that I have about these projects that you shared with us today. So first off, I'm curious if you had the technical knowledge on staff, for example, to plan the appropriate blooming periods for the pocket prairies, Jeff and Caitlin, regarding these pavers, et cetera, or if you needed to, seek those out through partnerships. And you did mention that a little bit, Caitlin, but it'd be great to hear more. So Jeff, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I would say that, we've got a pretty good staff here that's pretty experienced in a lot of the different facets. We did rely quite a bit on the United Prairie Foundation, their director, because he's done a tremendous amount of prairie restoration. And it's kind of one thing to read it in a book or whatever, and it's another thing to have somebody that's actually done it before. So it's we have a lot of partners in what we do, and we try to always make sure that we're all on the same page, because nothing really happens in a vacuum. So and then as we do it more and more, we kind of start to figure out what plants work great, what plants maybe don't work as good, and you kind of try to start to really hone in on as the best that you can on every project.
Go ahead, Caitlin.
Ariel, great question. Into our budget, we have a line for staff training, and we're able to really support and cultivate what the team here is interested in. Lenny has really been fascinated by green infrastructure for a number of years, and we're able to support and grow his knowledge by sending him to trainings, and we have that line item right in our budget. We also have a very close network here in New York State among all of our 58 soil and water conservation districts. Help is literally just a phone call or an email away. Warren County is a sister county, probably an hour and 15 minutes away. And Nick Rowell has really been using these permeable pavers. So he was the local expert on it, and he was able to give us a lot of great information. And also Lenny is never hesitant to reach out directly to the companies as well. And oftentimes these companies will come do a demo or a Zoom meeting, provide pamphlets, things like that.
All right, great. Thank you for that information. And so part of the reason that I asked that question is because we have a great series of districts who have conducted projects through our NECD's Urban Agriculture Conservation Grant Initiative, but only about 100-something districts out of the 3,000 nationwide. So there's a huge opportunity to be working in the urban conservation and community space as well. But in a lot of cases, districts can be somewhat intimidated by getting started or don't know who their partners should be or where they find the knowledge that they may be lacking. So I'm curious if both of you could maybe you've already given some great comments on building good relationships and how to approach a company, for example. But I'm curious if both of you may be able to just give a couple quick lessons learned or advice pieces for districts that may be new in the urban or community conservation space.
Yeah, so what we've learned the most is that you've got to kind of figure out the stakeholders and then figure out the organizations that can help, because in the beginning, it felt like there was projects going on in the area that, let's say Audubon would be doing one and we'd be doing one and a park service would be doing one, and we're all kind of doing the same thing. And it made sense both financially and from the knowledge is to kind of combine those efforts and work together. And, you know, once you start finding those key people to work with and the key organizations, it just works better. You know, sometimes you kind of feel like you want to do it all on your own, but that doesn't always work very well. And you know, and not even just locally, but you know, getting to know people from across the country that are doing things sort of similar, because it is very intimidating to get started. We've helped a couple other districts in North Dakota start urban conservation programs, and you're kind of overwhelmed on everything. And it's kind of, you know, it takes a while to hone in on what the people, you know, at the end of the day, you want to have projects that people want to do. You know, you can't shoehorn things in that nobody's interested in. So, you know, kind of listen to the people on what they want and then try to work with that. Because yeah, you know, like the rain garden's a great example. We could have kept pushing on that, but it didn't work and nobody was interested in it. We would have, you know, spent money that was kind of wasted. So, you know, working with other organizations and kind of all coming together towards the common goal. Because at the end of the day, we're all trying to do the same thing. And, you know, sometimes you have to set your ego aside a little bit and make sure that we're doing the right thing. So that'd be my advice.
That's a great summary.
I love what Jeffrey said about knowing your stakeholders, getting them involved right at the start and utilizing their talents. Spot on. To augment what he said, our district has taken a lot of pride and many, many years to establish a solid foundation with our municipalities. And with that link in the stakeholder world, we are able to bring in heavy equipment operators and flaggers and experts to run a backhoe that we do not have in-house. So having a strong relationship with municipalities is a really great thing to start to cultivate. And also, you have to toot your own horn so loud. Stand up on that mountain and shout from the top of your lungs all the good things that your conservation district does. You know, and here in New York State, it was kind of a joke that districts were the best kept secret in New York State. What a terrible tagline. Get on social media, write those press releases, invite the media to your ribbon cutting ceremonies, really promote what you're doing. That is how you're going to reach your landowners. You'll get vested interest, and then you will really be able to see, as Jeffrey said, where their needs are, how you can help them. And also, one final comment here is to really have the capacity to support what the staff are interested in. We have an in-house limnologist with Jamie, and Lenny is our stream geomorphology specialist. You really take time to find out what their strengths are, what they're interested in, and be able to send them to a training or to a neighboring conservation district to learn more information. And that's how you're going to support your landowners.
That's such great advice from both of you. Thank you so much. And I just put the YouTube link in the chat box because you reminded me of a couple things, Caitlin. Number one, I'm tired of hearing that as well. The best kept secret. It's obnoxious. Like, let's stop, let's get beyond that, you know? And we've had a great webinar back in the fall last year from Laura Meyer, who works for the Washington State Conservation Commission. She did a webinar on marketing your conservation district. And that was a direct result of that same conversation that they were hearing in Washington, which is, you know, we're the best kept secret, nobody knows about us, but districts, again, that can be intimidating to start shouting the story. Like, a lot of us are trained in technical fields. I happen to be an entomologist. So how do we actually do that? What is the best way to get beyond that and make sure we aren't a secret anymore? So there's a ton of great information in all of those webinars. So I know I'm preaching to the choir in a lot of cases to this audience, but make sure to check the archive if you haven't already. And Caitlin, you also reminded me of a second plug that I wanted to give. So I had mentioned earlier to both Jeffrey and Caitlin that I was hugely thankful for them offering their time to be able to give a webinar today, because sometimes, you know, it can be intimidating to also present on this audience, but this is one avenue to get your word out there and to say, for example, we do great things in our district. Hey, county commissioners, look at, we presented to a national audience on this great project that you helped support and helped fund. So we're always looking for webinar speakers. If you have a project that you want to share and you would like to get the word out for either your grant funders or because it's just a wonderful project that you want the world to know about, then NACD is happy to provide that outlet for everyone as well. All right, so I haven't seen any additional questions in the chat box, but I do want to acknowledge there was a couple of comments about the various needs for compaction, which I'm assuming, you know, if anyone does plan to go into these green infrastructure type projects, of course, please look into the details of why you would need to do those specific things. And I would like to mention as well from Helen that Xerces is also an amazing resource for pollinators and plants nationwide. So on that note, I'll give it a couple more seconds, see if any more questions come in, but I do want to just give Jeffrey and Caitlin another opportunity as well for any closing thoughts or anything that might have occurred to you from our conversation today that you would like to share one final time. Jeffrey?
So yeah, so one thing I forgot to mention, and Caitlin mentioned it, was, you know, providing signage or informing the public of what you're doing, because a lot of times, like let's say in a park situation, people will walk by and wonder, what is this tangled mess of vegetation? And, you know, signage, you know, social media, magazines, any way you can get your information out there is super, super important, because people, you know, if you have 100 satisfied people and that one person thinks it's a mess and doesn't know what it is, they're gonna talk about it. So, you know, having signage, having as much information about your district and your projects as possible is always beneficial.
Ariel, if I may, I would love to propose a question to our audience this afternoon. After learning about, you know, green infrastructure and Jeffrey's pocket prairies, are people excited to maybe consider doing this at your conservation district?
Helen loves the pocket prairie idea. She's from Western Washington, and there are some areas that could really, where it could really work. Where she is, there could likely be pocket forests, and she could see landowners really responding to the idea as well. And where are you located, Helen? And feel free to pop off mute as well if you would like to, Helen.
Yeah, that's quicker. Kitsap County, so it's Kitsap Peninsula in the middle of Puget Sound.
Excellent.
Yeah, but yeah, that idea of having, like, calling it a pocket prairie just sounds so much more easier to do and containable and just more lively than, you know, like plant your native plants, you know, blah blah blah. It just kind of sums it up in a really nice way. I think it would go over really well with landowners.
I think it has a really charismatic ring to it. So that's
Yes.
a great marketing in itself, the
Yeah.
Pocket Prairie. So it will take us a couple days to get this YouTube up. I'll likely send it around to the registrants next week as well with all of the presentations so that you'll have Jeffrey and Caitlin's contact information if you have any questions as you encourage Pocket Prairies in your home locations as well. And it looks like Kathy Kathy agrees that she's in southern New Mexico in desert land, and Pocket Prairies might be a good alternative there too. Oh, it looks like Stephen, you might be trying to share, but I think you're on mute.
There, am I unmuted now?
Yeah,
Yeah,
you are.
I'm in central New Mexico up here in Albuquerque. And we have just completed, actually CUDA Soil and Water Conservation District, and we just collaborated with the county to do a series of residential rainwater harvesting videos, but not the rainwater harvesting you think of with the barrels. Ours is what you're talking about. Well, we can't call them rain gardens because they're in the desert and we don't get any rain. But our concept is that if we could get a bunch of homeowners to build these things and advocate, we could create a distributed stormwater management system throughout our little urban watershed here. So it's exciting to see NACD jumping on this and some great sharing. So yes, we're doing it here in Albuquerque.
That's great. You'll have to keep us updated. And as the project progresses, we'll have you on a future webinar in a couple of years.
Hopefully we'll have some to report. Yeah. We had a bunch of people go through the training, and about 14 of them agree to be ambassadors, residential rainwater ambassadors, but you know how it goes. Some of them followed through, some of them didn't. Oh yeah, there's a Kathy right there. Yeah, one of them is online right now.
Well,
Hi,
she advocates for your presentation, so it sounds like you've already been volunteered to share about your work.
Great. All right.
All right, perfect. Well, I think on that note, it sounds like we've had some great enthusiasm for the work that was shared today. So thank you again both for taking the time and sharing your work with us and enabling us to learn from all of you. And on that note, like I mentioned, I'll send around the YouTube and the presentations within the next week or two, hopefully sooner. If you have any questions at any time, please feel free to reach out to me as well. So thank you very much for joining us today, everyone. And thank you again, Jeffrey and Caitlin.
Wonderful.